Good evening, friends. On the behalf of Usanas Foundation, I welcome all of you to Usanas Dialogues. Today, we have one of the most distinguished academic, diplomat, and an expert joining us, Ambassador Mohan Kumar. And I'm looking forward to a very exciting session on the current trends in foreign policy and diplomacy. Ambassador Kumar, you're welcome. And before I begin, I must share that I have had the personal honor to be attending one of the courses of Ambassador Mohan Kumar during my PhD program at Jindal University, and I have known him to be an excellent teacher, analyst, and a person who is very candid while sharing his thoughts on trends in diplomacy. Generally, when the diplomats speak or the bureaucrats talk, we expect them to be very formal and very balanced and status quo. But Ambassador Kumar is very candid and he is very thorough with his analysis. It was a great learning experience to attend this course. So I'll hand it over to Angna Guhare, today's moderator for the session. She's a fellow at Usanas Foundation. So over to you, Angna. Please introduce our esteemed guest today, and then we can begin with the session.
Good afternoon, Professor Kumar. Thank you for being here, and it's a great opportunity to interact with you. Before I start my questions, I would just like to give a small introduction of Professor Dr. Mohan Kumar. Ambassador Kumar is Professor of Diplomatic Practice at the Jindal School of International Affairs, OP Jindal University. In addition, he is Dean Strategic and International Initiatives, as also the inaugural director of the Jindal Global Center for G20 Studies at the university. Ambassador Kumar has had an outstanding career in the Indian Foreign Service lasting 36 years, which culminated in his posting as India's ambassador to France. Prior to this, he was India's ambassador to the Kingdom of Bahrain, where he was witness to the momentous events of the Arab Spring. Ambassador Kumar has enormous expertise in the area of international trade and multilateral negotiations. He was India's lead negotiator first at the GATT and then at the WTO in crucial areas such as intellectual property rights, services, dispute settlement, and environment. He has served on multiple GATT or WTO panels relating to dispute settlement. Ambassador Kumar oversaw India's bilateral ties with Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Maldives from 2005 to 2007. As Joint Secretary at the Ministry of External Affairs in New Delhi, Ambassador Kumar is author of 2 books, one titled Negotiation Dynamics of the WTO and Insider's Account, published by Palgrave Macmillan, other entitled India's Moment, Changing Power Equations Around the World, published by in India. So greetings and good afternoon, sir. And I have some, important questions pertaining to the ongoing.
Angna, I would like to interrupt. First, we would like to invite Ambassador Kumar to share his opening remarks first, and then we'll go ahead with the questions. So please invite him for the opening remarks first.
Yeah. Yes. So Professor Kumar, please share your remarks.
Thank you. Let me begin by thanking the Usanas Foundation. Am I heard? Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Thanks. So I think I'd like to speak for about 10 to 15 minutes. I wasn't sure about the format, but it's obvious an interaction is preferable to a monologue. That suits me just fine. So I'll just speak for 10 to 15 minutes max, and then we can have an interaction. Is that okay? Yeah? Okay, good. Yes. So I just want to thank the Usanas Foundation. And I think it's an extremely big honor for me. And I hope to be able to do this in person with you guys whenever that is possible at a future date. Let me be very brief. I'll divide my opening remarks into 3 segments. First, I'd like to say something about the world order. Second, I'd like to say something about India's moment in that world order. That also pertains to my book, which is India's Moment by HarperCollins India, for those of you who are interested. And lastly, I will say something about India's foreign policy and strategy at present, and whether that needs to undergo any change in the light of what is happening in the world order. So as far as the world order is concerned, what I want to really convey to all of you is that having observed it for more than 40 years now, I cannot remember a moment when we have had this kind of a world order or a situation which can only be characterized as polycrisis. And when I say polycrisis, what I mean is that there is a political crisis, there is an economic crisis, there is a social crisis, and of course, we've got two big conflicts which are ongoing. There is one in Ukraine, at the heart of Europe, and there is one in Gaza, which is ongoing. And there is a third one threatening to happen in South China Sea, East China Sea, Taiwan Strait. So this kind of situation is something that people may have seen in World War I, World War II, but not people like me who are baby boomers. I belong to the baby boomer generation, and I'm going to be 67 soon, but in the last 67 years, I cannot honestly tell you that there is anything which resembles the current situation. The second thing that I'd like to say is that what you see in the world order is also cascading strategic turbulence. You've always had strategic turbulence one way or the other, but we've never had this kind of cascading strategic turbulence. So what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is before one conflict has been completely resolved, you've got another conflict popping up. So if you just take into account the last three big events we have happened, and each one of them has upended the world order in its own way. First, we thought the public health issue, COVID, was a big deal. Everybody said this is a once in a lifetime event. Others said it's a black swan event, and we haven't been able to resolve it completely. Bear in mind that in Africa, still the vaccination percentages are very low. I must say we are extremely fortunate in India to have actually double vaccinated our population. At one time, I thought that would be impossible to do. But I think full credit to our government and authorities for having been able to do that. But just as we finished with all the difficult decisions with regard to COVID, you had the war in Ukraine, when Russia invaded Ukraine. So before we could really fully resolve the COVID issue, you're already on to Ukraine. And before we could actually recover, and you know that Ukraine has had a profound impact on what is known as the 3 Fs, which is food, fuel, and fertilizer. It's had a huge impact in upending geopolitics for India. I have written extensively saying that the conflict in Ukraine has actually caused an adversarial strategic landscape for India. We've never had a situation where Sino-Russian relations can be described as an alliance, except for a very few years in our independence, but that is the reality. And therefore, the strategic options for India have actually shrunk as a result of the conflict in Ukraine. I'm happy to expand on it if some of you are interested in pursuing that subject. So this cascading strategic turbulence, and before we were able to get a grip on Ukraine, bear in mind that food security is a serious issue for countries in Africa. Fertilizer prices have gone through the roof. Oil prices have gone through the roof. And before we could grapple with all of that, you have had an Israeli invasion of Gaza, of course, provoked by the events of October 7th, when the horrific attacks by Hamas happened in Israel. So this is what I mean by cascading strategic turbulence. That is one after the other, with none of it fully resolved. This is absolutely exceptional from a world order point of view, and it's never happened before. What it does is three things. One, it prevents policymakers from adopting a strategic response to issues. It allows policymakers only to adopt a tactical response, if you know what I mean. To adopt a strategic response, you need time. You need to reflect on what kind of long-term strategy you have to put in place. But when you have this kind of cascading strategic turbulence, policymakers and decision makers have no time to think about it. They are actually reacting ad hoc and trying and seeing how we can cope with issues as they arise. The second thing that happens is that authoritarian countries appear to have an advantage over democratic countries because democratic leaders have to be worried about the next election. And you can already see that the Indian leader has to be worried about the next election. The American leader has to be worried about the next election. The European Council elections are due in June. Whereas there is no such issue, frankly, for the Chinese leader or even the Russian leader, although elections did happen in Russia recently. I think it was pretty much a walkover for Putin, I would say. So that is the real the disconnect that you see. That is democratic countries on the one hand and authoritarian countries on the other. Democratic countries have finding it difficult to react to these events because of domestic political compulsions, which others don't seem to have. The third thing that has happened during all of this, what you are seeing is the relative decline of the unipolar moment. There was a unipolar moment when you had the United States wielding unbelievable power, but that has, I think, definitely come to an end. Most people agree that the unipolar moment is over. You have a situation where there is a relative decline in American power. I would not exaggerate this decline. And the two things that you must watch out is that don't exaggerate the decline of the American power and don't exaggerate the rise of China. Both, I think, tend to be exaggerated in the press and by scholars. I think I would underestimate both, but the fact is the unipolar moment is over, and what you are seeing is huge geopolitical friction between United States on the one hand and China on the other. This has also led to a bit of a bloc mentality, if you like. So you've got the G7 on the one hand, and many of them are allies. You've got the US, you've got Japan, you've got Australia, but you've also got countries like Philippines now, which are allies, treaty allies of the US on the one hand. And then, of course, you've got an axis developing. And I would like to call it the Sino-Russian axis. But around the Sino, and as we speak, Putin is actually in Beijing, in China. So that is a hugely important geopolitical visit from my point of view. And then you've got the countries like North Korea, Iran, Pakistan, actually ganging up around that Sino-Russian axis, if you like. So this is what you have. In the middle, you have a number of countries which actually say that they belong to the global south, that they actually practice a policy of multi-alignment, not non-alignment, but multi-alignment. And you've got a number of countries which actually say we are non-West. The Indian External Affairs Minister said it for the first time, saying that India is non-West, if you like. We are not anti-West, as Russia and China are. We obviously don't belong to the West because we are not a treaty ally of the United States, but we are non-West. And you've got a bunch of countries in the middle. I thought India's G20 presidency did a good job of providing a bridge between G20 and, G7 and this axis, Russia, China, and so on. And we were able to, I think, bring countries together. But since then, there has been a deterioration in the international climate, if you like. What is happening, therefore, is politically, countries are taking sides, depending on the conflict in Gaza, in Ukraine, and so on. Economically, what we are seeing is a weaponization of international trade. So if you see recent moves by Biden, he's imposing 100% duty on electric vehicles coming from China. European Union has started anti-dumping investigations on Chinese goods and services. India is extremely concerned about burgeoning trade deficit with China. So people are talking in terms of resilient supply chains, which is really code word for not having to depend entirely on China. So that's what is happening in trade. Militarily, we are having a situation where NATO is cocking a snook at Russia. Russia is actually making gains in the war in Ukraine. You would now have to be very, very prejudiced if you say that Ukraine is going to win the war. It appears absolutely crystal clear that Russia is making gains, and there is no way Ukraine is going to be able to evict Russia from Donbass or from Crimea. So that is as far as the international order is concerned. I'll spend a couple of minutes talking about India because India is important for all of us. India's moment is because it finds itself at a geopolitical sweet spot. Now, this is ironic and it's not automatic, and it is not to be expected that this will continue indefinitely. This is India's moment, yes, but it's definite in time and space. It's not going to last 20 years. So we have to be agile, quick, and try to exploit this moment to make sure we achieve our national priorities. I personally think Jaishankar, the External Affairs Minister's mantra, which he spelled out in his first book, The India Way, is absolutely pertinent. He said something to the effect that we must engage the United States, cultivate Europe, manage China, reassure Russia, and bring Japan into play. I think that is exactly what we have done and what he has done in the context of Ukraine. And this is described as a policy of multi-alignment, where we are able to engage with adversaries such as Israel and Palestine. We are able to engage with adversaries such as Saudi Arabia and Iran. Our Prime Minister is capable of talking to both Putin and Zelensky on the same day. So these are reflections of a policy of multi-alignment that India has embarked upon. However, the caveat that I have is that we will come under tremendous pressure. As things deteriorate, and as most certainly it will, India will be forced to pick sides. And that is when your true character will be tested. Just as we came under pressure on buying Russian oil, right? So anyway, take a look at my book, because I have designed an integrated assessment framework which can be used to understand foreign policy, but also evaluate India's foreign policy. I think that is something that I think it's worth taking a look at. What India is really doing through multi-alignment is a process of strategic hedging. So I'll be very blunt, since Mr. Abhinav has said I speak my mind. There is no reason not to speak my mind. 7 years after retirement, I'm a free man. So I might as well take advantage of that status of mine to speak freely. So if you see the kind of strategic hedging we are doing, with United States, we have a great relationship, but we don't want to put all our eggs in the American basket. So we cultivate relationship with France as well, right? That's what we do. I was ambassador in France, I should know. We have a serious strategic partnership with France, and we buy a lot of advanced defense weaponry from them. But that is good, because France practices strategic autonomy as well. Some of you, if you haven't, you should read Macron's speech at Sorbonne on April 25th. I've written about it in Hindustan Times. Take a look at it. I've called it Atmanirbhar Europe and Macron. Take a look at that article, but read Macron's speech. It's very interesting. He says we don't want to be a vassal of the United States. He keeps repeating that. So India, while it has an extremely close relationship with the United States, is never going to be a treaty ally of the US. That's not in our DNA, to be a treaty ally. So we do strategic hedging by also developing our relationship with France. With regard to Russia and China, it is in India's interest that Russia does not become a junior partner of China. Russia, in many ways, has become a junior partner temporarily but it is in India's long-term interest to cultivate ties with Russia in a way that Russia does not become a complete vassal of China. It's not in our interest to allow that to happen. And that is the reason why India must pursue its strategic partnership with Russia as well. In what India has done, and maybe that's the time to stop and then encourage questions from you. I think what India is following is a hub and spoke method of India foreign policy, a hub and spoke system of Indian foreign policy. And I will explain what I mean by that. In every big continent, we have chosen countries which will be the hub for Indian foreign policy. So if you take the Americas, that region, clearly the United States is an important partner. So that is the main hub. But in Latin America, I dare say Brazil is the country with which we have serious ties. So you've got US, you've got Brazil. You move to Europe and we've got two countries. We've got France, as I said, which is going to be central because there is cooperation in defense, there is cooperation in space, there is cooperation in energy and climate. So that's important. But we've also got UK, with which we have a colonial, ex-colonial relationship. So you've got UK and France, which serve as important hubs for Indian foreign policy in Europe. You move to the West Asia, or what Americans call Middle East. You've got Israel, you've got United Arab Emirates, and you've got Saudi Arabia. These three countries have emerged as important strategic partners for India in West Asia. In Israel, with regard to Israel, I needn't say much because we have a defense relationship, we have cooperation in counter-terrorism, we have a relationship in agriculture, which is vital, and also the startup ecosystem between the two countries. So Israel is critical. In fact, you can have a debate about how this important relationship is preventing India from taking a completely idealistic position on the Palestinian issue. You could legitimately have a debate about that question. Be that as it may, Israel is important. Both Saudi Arabia, UAE have emerged as very close partners of India. If there is an area where I would give the Modi government 10 out of 10, it is these two countries, because we virtually started from zero. These countries would never accept dealing with India because they would always say, sorry, Pakistan is our brother, you are merely our friend. But I think we have changed the paradigm successfully, and full credit to the government. So this hub and spoke system in West Asia revolves around Israel, UAE, and Saudi Arabia. In South Asia, our neighborhood, I think the results are mixed, frankly, because Pakistan is where it is. You've got a problem in Maldives now, and Nepal and Sri Lanka are countries that are struggling in their own way. So I would say Bangladesh perhaps is arguably the peg for India's neighborhood foreign policy. And then if you move east, Japan is the most important country for India, and that provides the hub in East Asia. You move further down to down under, and you've got Australia, which provides the peg for Indian foreign policy. So this is the hub and spoke system that I'm talking about. What Prime Minister Modi has done successfully is to establish personal rapport with leaders of these countries by making repeat visits. This doesn't happen if you just go to one country once in 10 years, which was the system we had before Prime Minister Modi. What Prime Minister Modi has changed is, I remember I was just packing my bags in Paris upon retirement when I got a call from Prime Minister Modi's office saying the PM wants to come. I said, I've got 20 days before retirement. They said he knows that, but he still wants to come. I said, fine, it's fine, let him come. What was the reason for that visit to Paris? Prime Minister Modi said there is a young leader called Macron who has just been elected in Paris. I want to be the first overseas leader to meet him in Paris. That was the only reason. There was no other reason. And I said, wow, that is long-term investment in the leader. And that is what paid off substantially, because he ended up being the first non-European leader to meet Macron. Macron was half his age, by the way, at the time. He was 38 or something. But he came saying, listen, I'm very curious to know what kind of a leader you are. India is important. And he got, of course, a red carpet welcome. In fact, if you ask me, two leaders with whom Modi shares a very, very intense, personal, close rapport. One is obviously the late Japanese leader Shinzo Abe, who is, I think, the closest foreign leader to Modi. The second is Macron. There is no doubt, because they've met so often. I have been in those meetings where they talk, and you can easily see the chemistry between the two leaders. Anyway, I'm going to conclude by saying the following. I think these are interesting times, and I'm saying interesting times in the way in which the Chinese use the expression. You know, the Chinese, when they want to tell a friend that you're going to have a difficult time, they say, may you live in interesting times. That's how they put it. But that doesn't mean interesting times. These are challenging times for Indian foreign policy. And I think what Indian foreign policy will be asked upon to do with the next government is that we will be tested in some of these assumptions that we have made. Our relationship with some of these hub and spoke countries will be tested severely. And therefore, I sincerely hope that the Foreign Service, the External Affairs Ministry, and I fully expect Dr. Jaishankar to continue, frankly, assuming the government comes back to power, then I think we have more than a fair chance of trying to cope with these challenges. So I will conclude here, and thank you very much, Usana's Foundation, for this opportunity. And I'm happy to explore further some of these points or any other points that you may have in the question and answer session that will follow. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Wonderful observations and insights. I have few questions, and to begin with, I was going through your book, The India's Moment, a very interesting book, where somewhere you mentioned that no developing country leader at the time demonstrated greater faith and allegiance to United Nations and multilateralism than Jawaharlal Nehru. How do you look at the foundational constructs and continuity of the essence of multilateralism in Indian foreign policy in 2024? According to you, is India truly a strong negotiator in the world now? Over to you, sir.
Okay, so that's an interesting question. If you read my book, I actually say that India made a subtle shift with regard to its unconditional commitment to multilateralism. You're quite right. When in Nehru's time and when India was born as an independent country, there was no question. In fact, one of the earliest points I make in my book is that even before India's independence, the Maharaja of Patiala participated in the Versailles Conference. Not many people are aware of this. It's amazing how India actually was committed to multilateralism even before it became independent. I think the problem for us was that when we were repeatedly deprived of a seat in the Security Council, that proved to be a landmark moment, especially 2005, when the G4 countries, that is India, Japan, Brazil, and Germany, we should have been allowed as permanent members. I believe the UN made a mistake in not doing that. Since then, what you've seen is the weakening of the United Nations, the weakening of its legitimacy, the fact that the UN Security Council does not reflect contemporary realities, power realities. So I think that is what has happened. India, therefore, had no choice but to shift its attention from multilateral groupings only to an array of plurilateral groupings. So India became a great defender of small groupings, which are described by IR scholars as mini-laterals, if you like. But so if you take Quad, for example, we have decided that Quad is a much better place to work in context of Indian Ocean rather than keep talking about it in the bigger forums that you have. So Quad is one area where we have invested heavily. We've got a series of trilaterals. For example, India, France, United Arab Emirates. That's a very important trilateral that we have to work in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. You've got also a resilient supply chain partnership between India, Japan, Australia, which is yet to take off completely, but still it's there. So we have decided to invest in a number of mini-laterals involving 3 or 4 countries. If you take I2U2, for example, India, Israel, United States, United Arab Emirates. I think it's a big deal, frankly, I2U2 in the area of Gulf, where we have no clout normally. Normally, we had no strategic presence in the Gulf, except sending 8 billion people there, 8 million people, sorry, there, and getting their remittances and importing oil. But now we have a strategic presence there. We also got this amazing, game changer called the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC. It's a big deal. Unfortunately, the Israeli conflict in Gaza erupted, so there has been a setback. I still believe it's a game changer. So what you are seeing, Angna, is that you're seeing a transition from India's unconditional commitment to multilateralism to an investment in plurilaterals. But that's, you can't really blame India because we simply did not get a seat on the high table. That's the way I would interpret the change in India's policy. I have mentioned that as one of the criterion in my integrated assessment framework, that is commitment to multilateralism. I would not say the commitment to multilateralism has weakened, but what I would say is that we are exploring alternatives, serious alternatives to multilateralism.
So you also mention in the book that it's like a hypothesis. You have mentioned if the number of people dipped in poverty post 1991, the more India became a key stakeholder in international negotiations and a key strategic partner. Do you think countries in the global south have a fair chance to emerge as stakeholder countries in the evolving international order, given this hypothesis?
So the fundamental point that I make is I describe it with what I believe was a novel expression, which is poverty veto. And I say that there is a poverty veto which is exercised by the 500 million people who are poor in India, and it could be more, but my assessment is there are 500 million people, and they cast a shadow on Indian negotiations every time. Definitely in the WTO, where I spent 10 years, definitely in climate change, I could see it in Paris, but also even in a conflict like Ukraine, the fact that we are being forced to buy Russian oil at a discount is because of the poverty veto, not to poke the Western countries in the eye. That's what we explained to the US. We told them this has nothing to do with you. It's got to do with India's economy. It's got to do with the fact that we have got poor people and they need to be lifted out of poverty. As for your question on the prospects for Global South, I think the old comment by a Bill Clinton aide that it's the economy is stupid. So that's the answer I can give you. The Global South will be able to play a role only if they can become economically relevant. They are not economically relevant today. I don't consider China to be part of the Global South. China is an $18 trillion economy with a per capita income of over $10,000. So China does not belong to the Global South. But countries like India, Indonesia, Brazil, Nigeria, South Africa, if these countries can become $5 to $10 trillion economies in the next 5 years, then I think the answer to your question is in the affirmative. I think the Global South can play a huge role in international affairs.
Thank you, sir. So I'm very curious to know that there is a lot of discussion about non-alignment movement, where it stands today, and India's position. So, taking into account all these debates and dialogues and discussions, what seemingly would be the position of non-alignment 2.0 in Modi 3.0?
So Abhinavji has already said that I'm not, in the habit of pulling any punches. I personally think non-alignment is absolutely irrelevant, which is why we have consistently sent lower ranked officials now to the summit. The Prime Minister has stopped going. I think the External Affairs Minister also did not go. I think Narasimha Rao was absolutely correct. Even in his time, when Narasimha Rao was Prime Minister and the Soviet Union had already disintegrated, some foreign service officers told him non-alignment is a big deal and so on. And Narasimha Rao, in his typical fashion, pouted and then asked this question, non-aligned against whom? That is the question he asked. And that's the question I will ask you, non-aligned against whom? Because it's only when you have two camps firmly established that you can talk about non-alignment. But in our case, even if you consider US and China as two camps, our problem is we can only be aligned in favor of one camp, and that is US. China is clearly an adversary, right? China is the most important strategic threat that is faced by India. So there is no question of aligning ourselves with China, which is why I say non-alignment is dead and done with, which is why I prefer to use the word multi-alignment. I personally think non-alignment has no place at all. What you can say is non-alignment has, I think, mutated into something like the global south. You could say that. A number of countries that are non-aligned have now become countries of the global south. But I really don't see any prospect for non-alignment 2.0 in a Modi government 3.0. In a Modi government 3.0, the hub and spoke system that I described, the key countries in that hub and spoke system, I think there will be a further intensification of India's bilateral relationship with the United States, Brazil, UK, France, UAE, Saudi, Israel, Japan, and Bangladesh. It's going to be more of the same, frankly. It's going to be much more intensive relationships with these. More importantly, I look forward to some very serious reforms which can be done by India in the first 6 months of the new government. Bear in mind that this government had to withdraw both the land reform bill and the agricultural reform bill. Both bills were withdrawn because of agitation, whatever you want to say. I personally think it was protests by vested interests, but that doesn't matter. In a democracy, you have to cope with these things. But I think the first 6 months of the government, I have written extensively by saying we have to carry out the land reforms and the agricultural reforms if we are to become a 10 trillion economy as quickly as possible.
Contemporarily, at present, the trajectory of India-EU bilateral, the trajectory of India-EU relations is spacing up. Given the fact that India shares great ties with the economic engine, which is the Germany, and the defense engine, France of Europe, while there are certain existing divergences or differences in the European Union, within the European Union, what exactly or what possibly can India do to have a seamless approach towards cultivating a strong relationship with EU in the larger theater of the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah, so I think we need to take the relationship with France to the next level. I think there is a wonderful document for those of you who are interested, which is called the Horizon 2047 document, which actually lays out the roadmap for the development of ties between France and India, very painstakingly put together by the Ministry of External Affairs in Delhi and Quai d'Orsay in Paris. I think it's a document worth reading for some of your young members of the USANA's Foundation. Germany, I think we will continue to have an economic relationship, which is important. My main answer to your question is that India must make haste to sign a free trade agreement with European Union as quickly as possible. It should have been done yesterday, as far as I'm concerned, but fine. We've got elections, they've got elections. There is a window of opportunity in the beginning of next year, because there is a new commission which takes over only on 1st of December. We have a new government which will take over 4th or 5th of June. They've got a new council, European Council, and a commission which takes over 1st of December. So nothing can happen between June and December, which is unfortunate. But I think sometime after December, the Europeans take their Christmas vacation very seriously. So nothing can happen in December either. But January, when they come back from their Christmas vacation, is when I think we should really make a serious attempt to wrap up the FTA negotiations. I'll be honest again, this is too important a matter to be left to the Commerce Ministry and to the Brussels the bureaucracy. This has to be done by the Prime Minister's office from our side and by the European Commission President on their side. This is just too important to be left to bureaucrats. This is of extreme geopolitical significance. So we need to really go ahead, sign the FTA in the beginning of next year.
I think Abhinav has a question.
Thank you, Arna. Excellency, thank you very much for your very insightful and enlightening remarks. I've always appreciated your plain speak and candidness. In fact, while you were speaking, I was thinking about one of the lectures which I attended in your courses, and there was one discussion going on, and I was extremely critical of the Indian foreign policy. After that, I submitted one assignment on that, and I was very apprehensive what kind of marks I'm going to get. But incidentally, I got the highest marks in the entire class in that paper. Okay, so initially, in your opening remarks, you discussed about this real dichotomy, this real tough dilemma which India faces between the US and Russia. And recently, as we see that Russia, China, they're almost on the verge of some kind of a strategic alliance. But at the same time, India's equation with America is also getting worse. I mean, the recent happenings in the recent past, the kind of bad press which we have got in their country, and also the mistrust which has been going on for a very long time, it simply shows that despite all our hard works, there is something which is very badly missing between India and the US, and this trust factor will always be a major concern. Given that, how India should handle this entire situation, and the China problem that many Western think tanks, even several experts are saying that there's a likelihood of China escalating situation on the border. So what exactly India can do, and how should we handle the situation?
So the diplomat in me tells me that we should not put all our eggs in one basket. So I think relying entirely on the United States for your strategic challenges would actually be foolish. Similarly, relying entirely on France for your strategic challenges vis-a-vis China is also foolish. So the point is this: there is a period between now and the time when we can become a 10 trillion economy, right? This is the time when international relations scholars say that India should do what is known as external balancing. And what is meant by external balancing is that since there is a power differential between India and China to the factor of 1:5, if you take GDP, you take GDP per capita, you take the poverty level, you take defense expenditure, everything there is a factor of 1:5. China is 5 times bigger, 5 times better, whatever you want. India, therefore, needs support from United States, Japan, and France. I would list these three countries as major and very important. These are important countries to enable India to face the challenge from China. How much support you want to assign to US, how much support you want to give to France, and how much of support you expect from Japan will vary from year to year, issue to issue, frankly. For example, if you want China not to surround you through a string of pearls strategy, I have found Japan very useful. We always tell Bangladesh, Bhutan, other countries, if you want foreign countries to kind of invest in your country, why don't you let Japan invest? Bangladesh has actually reacted very positively. I mean, which country would you rather invest in Bangladesh, China or Japan? Obviously, from our perspective, Japan. So we have encouraged triangular cooperation as a way to countering China. As far as US is concerned, the dilemma is this. US needs India at this point as a counterweight to China, right? India needs United States not just to counter China, but also as a place of immigration for your youth, as a place for, as a market for your goods and services, including high tech, as a country which actually can receive a number of highly qualified immigrants from India. So India needs the United States for many more reasons than United States needs India. The problems that you talk between India and the United States, my honest assessment is, I think we are capable of managing that. You should not be carried away by the public statements that they make on the extent of religious freedom that's available in India or not. Anybody who knows the American system knows that some of them have no job to do except this. So they do it every year. I mean, there is an envoy for religious freedom. If he doesn't talk about religious freedom, why would he justify his salary? So, you know, you have to accept that and move on. That's all. Be a little thick-skinned. I've always felt, and that is one of the things that I feel a little sorry about. I think Indians have lost the ability to laugh at themselves. I think you should have the ability to laugh at themselves. Hey, you are a 5 trillion economy, for God's sake. Don't behave like a banana republic. Just because somebody tells you you screwed up somewhere, be a man. Take it in your chin and say, yeah, we screwed up. It doesn't matter. Move on. Somehow we have become ultra sensitive now as a country. Anybody tells you something, then we all get worked up and say, oh my God, you know, India is the best country. How dare they say it? No, I mean, I think we are confident enough as a country to move on. So Americans will say what they say. That's all right. And if you want to say those things about the US, America now gives you abundant opportunities to say what you want. You can release every statement every day about America now, about their state of democracy, about the state of academic freedom in their universities, about abortion, about black rights. What do you want? You should actually create an envoy, make a foreign service fellow like me and say that, listen, you should release a statement against America every day. I'm very happy to do that in excellent English, frankly. I mean, I wouldn't do it, obviously, but you know, I'm obviously trivializing an important issue, but you get the drift of what I'm saying, which is that I think we should be less sensitive. I think the key is, what if America and China kiss and make up? That's the critical question for India. Don't rule it out. You know, in international relations, you should never rule out anything. What if America and China kiss and make up? Doesn't look likely, and certainly doesn't look likely if a certain Mr. Trump becomes the occupant of the next White House. But who knows? In politics, never say never. That is when I think India will have to rethink. But my sense is there are about 70 dialogues between America and India. There is just too many things going on between the two countries. I think the relationship has reached a certain level of irreversible excellence. I don't think it's possible to have, even if there is a crazy guy who becomes the president of the United States, I don't think he can set back the relationship with India substantially. But I think India should be aware that putting all eggs in the American basket is always a risk. So you try to cultivate France, cultivate Japan, keep your ties with Russia. In any case, my friends in the army tell me, sir, for the next 10 years, we cannot reduce our dependence on Russia. This is the biggest strategic mistake which has been committed by the Indian government over the last 25 years. We have continued to depend on Russia. Yes, there was a time when the Western countries imposed sanctions, but nothing prevented you from becoming Atmanirbhar. Nothing prevented you from getting it from Israel or from somebody else, but we haven't. We just continue to depend year after year on Russian weaponry, and now the chickens are coming home to roost. But I think this will resolve itself over a period of 10 years. I think the government of India knows now that we have to be Atmanirbhar. We are doing that, getting a lot of weaponry from Israel, getting a lot of weaponry from France, US, of course. So I think this will resolve itself. With America, there will always be a few issues here and there, but I am just a basic believer in the fundamental importance of the relationship. So I don't think we should worry too much, but yes, you should do your part of strategic hedging, for sure. In any case, you should never, we've already done that once with Russia and we are paying the price now. We put all our defense eggs in one Russian basket. This is a big mistake. We should never have done it. But we have, and we are paying a price. We should now not swing to the other extreme and put everything in the American basket. That would be dumb. You should be able to learn your lessons. But thank you very much for your question. And thank you for your kind remarks. I mean, for a professor, nothing gives you more pleasure than hearing somebody say, hey, you made sense when you taught us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was always an honor and a delight to be taught by you. I have one more question. Then we have a question from one of our brilliant interns, Shubhi Sharma. So my question is basically pertaining to Europe. In Europe, I see a lot of internal disorder in their house, like between this whole US and Russia, this frictions and conflict pertaining to Ukraine. Now coming back to Europe, I must say that China is making a strong outreach to Europe. Recently, Xi Jinping made a very lightning tour to Europe, and they are opening factories, EV factories in Berlin, Hungary. They're also reaching out to France, and they're saying that, we need China. Even as far as Russia is concerned, there is a mixed opinion in Europe. And also Europeans are looking at developing their own security apparatus. So, and on the other side, it seems that Russia is more or less, they're likely to wrap up the Ukraine war by summer. In one of my private conversations with some of their top level policymakers who are visiting India, they said that, we'll take care of this entire issue by, let's say, by August or September. So if that happens, how do you see this, the Western camp headed towards? I mean, what's exactly we are looking at in the Western camp?
So 2-3 things, Mr. Abhinav. So firstly, I think you are right about the serious divisions in the European Union. My sense is that if Ukraine cannot unify Europe, then I don't know what will. This was such an existential war for them, and it should have unified them much more, but it hasn't. So that is the state of Europe today. Having said that, I think Europeans realize that they have to Trump-proof their foreign policy. You know what I'm saying? They are fully prepared for Donald Trump as the next president of the United States. Therefore, they think the transatlantic relationship is going to be a problem. They think that NATO is going to suffer if Trump comes to power, and so on. So I think there is a clear realization in Europe. Again, I would request all of you to read Macron's speech, which he made to Sorbonne on April 25th, where he talks of an Atmanirbhar Europe, if you like. Atmanirbhar is, of course, my word, not his, but that's essentially what he's saying. I think, however, anybody who tells you that by August, Russia will wrap this whole thing up, I think that is being a little too optimistic. What I expect will happen is some kind of a stalemate, because the West is not going to allow Russia to walk over Ukraine. What Russia can expect is they can continue to sit on land that they are currently occupying, which is Donbass and Crimea. But there will be a lot of weaponry, money given to Ukraine, even if Trump comes to power. I think a lot of money will come to Ukraine. Ukraine will continue to cause problems for Russia here and there. The idea from the West is to keep Russia tied down, not to allow Russia to then attack another NATO country. My real worry, if you ask me, is that not many people know that NATO soldiers are already in Ukraine. They're already in Ukraine, in the garb of special military advisors and so on. So I think it's a dangerous situation if tomorrow, and Ukraine is going to get long-range missiles and F-16 fighters because of the US aid. If there is a long-range missile from Ukraine which hits Russia, in the heart of Russia, then I think we have a real problem, because then you're looking at a possible conflict between NATO and Russia. That is the scenario that I think we should all avoid, because once that happens, all bets are off. Then Ukraine becomes a pawn. And then your scenario of Russia winning the war and living happily thereafter is not a scenario that I share, because I don't think the West will keep quiet. West will keep on pumping more money, more weapons to Ukraine to make sure Russia doesn't walk away happy. They will expect Russia to be tied down in Ukraine. That is, I think, the most likely scenario. We will see the outcome of the Xi Jinping Putin meetings in China. We'll see. I'm waiting for the joint statement so that one can take a look at it, because China is also walking a tightrope. As you rightly said in your earlier remarks, China has just finished a charm offensive in Europe. It hasn't led to anybody being charmed, frankly, because I think everybody is able to read the Chinese game now. But we will see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Kumar. I think you're right. And in fact, while I was having my interaction with the Russians about the course of this whole entire conflict, now in the light of what you just said, this, that the Ukrainians getting a long-range missile and hitting somewhere in the heart of the Russian country, that makes situation even more dangerous. And from my conversation, I just got a feeling that some of the some segments in the Russian policy making world, they are not averse to using nukes if the situation comes to that level. Okay, with that, I'll just I'll ask Shubhi to ask a question, because the discussion can go on and on. But Shubhi, over to you.
Yes, thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, sir, for that very enriching lecture. My question was, you mentioned the hub and spoke model, and you mentioned that in West Asia, India has chosen UAE, Saudi, and Israel. So why is Iran left out, apart from the fact that it is under sanctions by the US? Apart from that, what's the other factor, especially in light of the recent Chahbar agreement that we have signed for 10 years? So why can't Iran become a potential partner for us in West Asia? Thank you.
So, Shubhi, that's an excellent question, actually. And if you actually look at the civilizational ties between India and Iran, you're quite right. Iran should be a hub and spoke partner for India as well. I'm afraid I still reiterate Iran cannot be that kind of a partner for India, because obviously there is pressure from the United States, without a problem, without a doubt. There is pressure. But frankly, we are also looking after our interests. If you look at investment potential that can come from UAE and Saudi Arabia, that is much more than what Iran can possibly invest in India. So if you look at my book, and if you look at my integrated assessment framework, one of the key criterion is material gain and self-interest. So I'm going to respond to you very frankly by saying Iran does not check all the boxes for me, because we are looking for not just a hub and spoke from a strategic angle, but also those who can invest in India, those who can share technology with India, those who can give us counterterrorism help to India. And I don't think Iran is in a position to do that. It doesn't mean that we are going to fight with Iran. I am merely saying Iran is not that fundamental hub and spoke, or hub, as you call it, in that region. We will continue to have good ties with Iran. But the fact is, under American pressure, we've been forced to cut down our petroleum imports from Iran and Venezuela. That's just a fact. You have to accept it. Iranians know this as well. And I think in the past, frankly, Shubhi, there have been negotiations with Iran. I have myself sat in on some of those. It's very tough negotiating with them. You know, I have nothing against the Iranians. I love them, but it's very tough negotiating with them. They go back on some of the things, and I think that is something that we have to keep in mind as well. So I would say just the overwhelming material interest and real politic interest rides over the ideological affinity, if you like, between Iran and India. That's the honest answer I will give you. At this point in time, there is no comparison between the strategic gain that India expects from its relationship with Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE, rather than Iran. But that's an excellent question, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir.
Angna, we can take one more question and then we'll have to conclude. Because I think Kamal Madishetty has asked one question. Angna, can you just can you read out the question? Are you there, Angna? No worries, I'll just read out the question. So Kamal has asked, to what extent is the growing rift between US and Russia reversible, especially considering that there may be a change in administration in the US later this year? Could that be the beginning of the end of the current poly crisis?
So that's a good question, Kamal. I personally think it is the conflict with China that is irreversible. It's hard because there is bipartisan consensus in the United States today that China is the pacing challenge. They use the expression in American English called pacing challenge, which means an existential challenge, if you like. So China will continue to be the major challenge for United States, regardless of whether it is Trump or Biden. Russia, most certainly it is reversible, in my view. If the Russians can somehow settle with Ukraine, and if the Europeans can use this opportunity to build a European security architecture that is inclusive of Russia, but with some guarantees with regard to Ukraine and NATO. I mean, Ukraine can certainly belong to EU, but I think the red line for Russia will be if Ukraine seeks to become a member of NATO. But if some security guarantees can be put together, I still think the US and Russia in the medium to long term can be on good terms once again. But it is the one with China that I think is more serious, and that I think no leader in the US will be able to actually reverse the negative trajectory in the relationship between US and China. But with Russia, Kamal is right. There could be a change. And if you have somebody like Trump, he will say, I will do a deal with Putin. I love him. I do a deal with Putin, and he will, make a fancy trip to Russia and see. We will have to wait and see. I think a Trump presidency is going to bring so much of unpredictability and uncertainty in the international order that we will just have to wait and see.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kumar.
So one final question I would like to ask, that you have mentioned it in different forums that, being a very different tough thing, and, now you have transitioned to become a professor. So, I mean, any closing remarks on that?
So my closing remarks and my joke always is that from a distinguished diplomat, I have become an extinguished diplomat. And from an extinguished scholar, I'm trying to become a distinguished scholar. That's my only line with my students. Being a professor has been a great experience in my view, because the students really don't give a damn whether you are an ambassador in your previous life or whether you flipped hamburgers in McDonald's. They don't care. They care about how you teach in the class. I love that. So in the initial stages, many of them would be a little starstruck. Oh, this is an ambassador, especially since I was the first ambassador to be hired by OP Jindal Global University as the professor of practice. And like an idiot, when it was 45 degrees outside, I was wearing my suit and going, and then of course now I've shed everything. It's ridiculous. But at the time, yes, some students were taken in by the way I spoke and by the way I explained. But over time, the kids are smart. The kids are smart. I mean, one thing that's been a revelation for me, and my heart goes out actually, because I have been on record as saying that if I write the civil services exam today, I'm not sure I'll make it. I made it in 1981. Today, I don't know. The competition is so severe. Kids are so smart that I just think it's a shame that the country is not able to afford opportunities to everybody. So many of them are saying, okay, we will find a life outside India. I take that very personally, because India could actually benefit from these kids. They are super smart. I don't think I was half as smart when I was their age. But I think the real transition is that as a diplomat, you are actually making the argument for power. That's what you're doing as a diplomat. But as a professor, you're actually making the power of argument. The power of argument is what makes you a good professor, right? How good your arguments are. Whereas as a diplomat, you're exercising power. So that's a completely different ballgame. I'm glad I've left that behind. I think for all diplomats who want to be professors, the first thing is you'll have to get rid of your Mercedes-Benz, stop drinking excellent French wine, stop wearing Gucci shoes, Brioni suits, then go for Kolhapuri chappal, Karol Bagh jeans, and be very humble. I'm kidding, of course, I'm exaggerating. But I think there is a need for certain, I think the most of all, you need to be intellectually inclined. Not everybody is intellectually inclined. A lot of my batchmates initially laughed at me and said, what the hell are you doing? Going to some back of beyond place called Sonipat and teaching a bunch of kids. Come on, I thought you'd do better than that. But I said, no, this is my passion. I'll do it. I had a doctorate from Sciences Po. One of the stupid things that the government of India does is to retire people at 60. I'm 67 now, so I'm not saying this with any rancor or any bad feeling, but it is absolutely ridiculous to think that 60 is the age to retire, frankly. So they should do something about it. At 60, when I retired from Paris, I really thought I was at the top of my game. I don't feel bad not being an ambassador. I merely feel bad that I couldn't contribute more to my country. If I was given an opportunity, I think I could have contributed more. And I think as people live longer in India, they will have to do something about this. I also find people are joining the civil service much later. I joined at 24, and I think I was bloody old when I joined. And now people join at 30 and 32 and 34, and God knows. I keep thinking, that doesn't make any sense to me, frankly. But anyway, if you guys haven't watched a movie called 12th Fail, please watch it. It's a brilliant movie. It's a brilliant, brilliant movie. It's very realistic. I could relate to it. It's about a boy who takes the civil service exam the 6th time. Brilliant, brilliant movie. I would put it on par with Three Idiots, actually. Great, great movie. If you haven't watched it, you should watch it. But thank you very much, guys. This has been exciting. Happy to do this in person. Whenever you call me to one of your fancy places in Udaipur, my colleague tells me you've got these fancy places where you have meetings. So don't just condemn me to online meetings. Do call me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. We would love to invite you to our offline events in Udaipur and any other parts of the country also. Definitely, it was a great pleasure having you with us today. Before I end, I would just like to share one small thing. I think you already mentioned towards the end about it, the students going abroad. So frankly speaking, these very young, bright kids, doing international relations or public policy, they don't find enough opportunities in India. That's something which I've observed. I went to Cornell for my public policy course, and in the US, I saw that even in the government there was a revolving door system, and people would join the government system for 2 years, 3 years, then go back to the private sector, then come back. So it was a very fluid system where people had a lot of opportunities. People from public policy background or from the international relations background, they could go and join the foreign services, come back. But here, frankly speaking, there is no such opportunity for most of these people. So that's something which the government needs to come out, and they need to open up these places for these really bright kids. And my second observation, sometimes definitely civil services, cracking this examination is a great feat and requires a lot of hard work. But I think, the way I have interacted with people, I think we have made a bit too much out of it, because I see youngsters wasting a hell lot of time until the time they are 32, 33, they're writing this examination. And some of them who failed the exam were not able to crack it. They carry that burden throughout their life. I've even come across people who joined academics after not being able to clear the civil services. Even in the academia, they were having that inferiority complex that we could not pass it. And even after 10 to 12 years of serving in the academics, they were discreetly writing some state civil services examination. So that gives a very bad sense of inferiority complex to academics. And certainly India as a country needs good scientists, good professors, and good people with very strong research skills. That's just a very humble thought from my side. You're very senior to me, but I just thought that I felt that I can share it very frankly in front of you. I wouldn't have spoken it elsewhere, but definitely with you I can share. Thank you very much.
I could not agree more. I could not agree more. You're absolutely right. I agree with everything that you have said. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. And hopefully see you very soon to one of our online and offline events. Thank you very much, Angna, for taking care of today's event. You did a great job. Thank you very much, Preeti, Dr. Jan, all my interns. And I'll request all my interns to stay back for 5 minutes after this.
Thank you, guys. See you. Bye.